an interesting brush with me today. Have you seen a brush like this before? This is a hat brush. A hat brush. I really was not very aware of a brush like this, a specialized brush like this, before I started looking into the ideas for this video. But I was immediately drawn to it when I discovered that it existed, because I'm a big fan of tools that look almost conventional, almost typical, but they have maybe one little thing about them that makes them a little bit different, but also makes them specialized for the specific job that they were created to do. And as you can see, this brush has a little curve to it. I'm no expert on specialized brushes, but I've never seen a design like this before. And of course, if you think about a hat, you think about the crown. This curve makes the brush ideally suited to help clean the curved area around the crown of a hat. So I thought we would try that. Try putting our specialized brush to use with some hats that I have here at home. I have 3 hats that we will use the brush on today. And we're going to look at the hats in a specific order. Let's take a look at this one first. This one, as chance would have it, is the most in need of our attention with the brush today, because it is the dustiest of the 3, but that's not why we're looking at this hat first. This hat was made by Bailey, as we can see down here. And the model of this hat is the Glen. You can see that lettering in gold right there. This hat is the softest of the 3 that we're going to look at today. And because the felt on this hat is so soft and pliable, it makes the least amount of sound when you handle it. This is the darkest sounding of the three hats. And yes, only here will you get a hat video where we're most interested in the sounds the hat makes. As the felt in a hat is stiffer and stiffer, the sound gets brighter and more responsive as you handle it. So that is the order that we're going to go in today. But this hat does not live in a hat box in my closet, unfortunately. It's up on the shelf, and so it is the dustiest of the hats. So I hope with our brush here we can breathe the most life back into this hat of all three. So we're just gonna, we'll start in with the brim first, just to get a feel for how the brush handles. I know it may be hard to see. Two of these three hats are black. You can see how the curve of the brush lets it hug up against the curvature of the crown, just so, and lets the brush get into the crease between the crown and the brim more effectively than a straight brush could. And we're brushing in a counterclockwise manner and just rotating the hat as we go. This hat is actually designed to be collapsed so that you can pack it in a suitcase if you wanted to. It's designed to be collapsed this way. I'm not gonna actually do it, but it will collapse flat if you press along the long axis, I suppose you could say. And it will go flat and you could pack it, and in theory it will spring right back. I've never actually done that, but I know that's something the Glen was made to do. It's probably another reason why the felt in this hat has to be so soft and pliable to make it collapsible. The felt in this hat is also impregnated with Teflon, from what I've read, which helps with its ability to repel moisture and water. So I've brushed around this brim. I haven't touched the crown. Again, it might be hard for you to tell, but I know I can tell the difference between the color, the black of the brim and the kind of dusty gray of the crown. It seems like it's making a difference to me. Can you see a difference? If you have a felt hat that you actually do wear outside from time to time, that you use to protect your head from a little bit of rain, a little bit of drizzle, it is important to keep your hat clean. A little bit of dirt on the felt can turn to mud. A little spot of mud, if it gets wet, it can make it a little harder to remove from the felt if it soaks in a little bit. So it's a good idea to not be as neglectful as I have been, and to keep your hats tidy if you wear them out. Well, I can see a difference. This is really restoring a lot of newness back to the hat in terms of its appearance, just from a few minutes of these bristles against the nap of the felt. Like I said, I have 3 hats today, but this is the only one that I've actually worn. Out and about. The other 2 were only worn as part of performances of a band that I was in years and years ago, where that hat, you'll see them shortly, where the hats had to do with the aesthetic of the band. So those hats were never worn outside, but this one was. I've actually been thinking about wearing this hat occasionally again. It's actually a really good look, particularly in the wintertime with a long dark coat. I'm sure sure that I'm doing this backwards from the way I should have done it. I should have started at the top. I hope you guys can see the difference here. Let's put the shape back in place here. You can see this hat has a narrow leather band instead of a very wide, more formal, dressy band. This leather and the very relaxed felt of the brim, gives it. It's not as dressy as a fedora with a wide brim would be. It's the brim almost gives me a vague Western look, while the top looks more like a fedora to me. Now the underside of the brim needs some help because since this hat doesn't have the benefit of a hat box, it's particularly dirty right in this part of the brim. Let's see if we can help that. Well, to my eye, the appearance has been much improved. I hope you guys can see the difference. But pay particular attention to the way this hat sounds as I hold it. This is the most pliable of the three. This is very soft, nearly, I'd almost say floppy kind of felt, which suits its style and purpose, I do believe. But we're going to compare this to the next hat in line and see if you can tell the difference. So this is the Glen by Bailey. All right, let's see what we have next. All right. This is hat number 2. You can see that this is a more conventional fedora shape. And it is made of stiffer felt because it has the traditional snap brim that is commonly associated with the fedora style. You would put it on and flip the front, the brim down like that. The back of the brim would stay up. And you need a stiffer felt in this binding along the edge to get the brim to do that. This is a Stetson fedora called the Mallory. So this is a more dressy hat, and it includes this amazing splash of color on the side with a very wide fabric hatband. Now, as I said, this hat and the one following this were only worn occasionally for performances of a band that I was in. Those were indoors. So these hats have not seen as much environment as the first hat did. Also, these two hats, this one and the next one, are stored in hat boxes in my closet. So the issue with a hat like this is not that it has a bunch of dust on it. But the issue with a hat like this is that because it spends most of its time in a hat box, the cardboard support of the hat box touches the hat right through here on the brim, a short distance away from the crown, and it gives the hat these little lines. There's these little marks in the felt. I don't know if you can see them, but but because they sit upside down in a cardboard cutout that rests right here, it gets these little lines in the felt. I don't know if you can, this one here is probably the most noticeable. There's a line right through here. So we're going to see if the hat brush can work any magic on the felt nap along this brim to try to make those lines, those little compressed markings, a little less noticeable. It's probably the most dusty on the underside of the brim because the hat sits upside down in its box, and it does seem to be, I see a little bit of dust. There's a little bit of a mark right there too. Why don't we work on the underside of the brim first, just to and I can hear even a difference the way the brush sounds against this stiffer felt. Can you hear that difference? It's like the felt fights back a little bit more with this hat. It's the surface noise. It's just a little different. No, it wasn't that dusty, but even that little treatment makes the underside of this brim look so much better. I can see a line right through here caused by the hat box. Let me work this area from here to here very deliberately, and we can see if it helps this line at all. Well, I still see it, but I know what I'm looking for. I wonder if this is the kind of thing that would take a little humidity to remove. Let me work on this area through here and see if I can make that any less noticeable. You know, the men's hat was so popular for so many years. And then more or less disappeared over the course of a few decades. It's interesting to read about that. The theories on why men's hats disappeared the way they did. people speculate that the rise of the personal automobile, or the rise of automobile ownership, might be a contributor. Because the hat ultimately was there for protection, to protect your hair or your head from dust or dirt or rain. And before everybody had a car, you spent a lot more time just walking in the elements. I guess I'm speaking mostly in urban settings. If you worked downtown and you were on a train or a carriage, perhaps, and had to work or had to walk through the streets, the hat would protect your head from all manner of dirt or soot from smokestacks or the light drizzle. The brim could protect your eyes from the sun before sunglasses were invented. But if you had your own car, then the amount of time you spent in uncovered travel started to go way down. Not to mention the fact that a hat was somewhat awkward to wear in a car. So some speculate that a lot of the practical, functional reason for wearing a hat started to go away when more and more people owned cars. Isn't that an interesting connection between two seemingly unrelated industries? Well, it certainly looks less dusty than it did before. I'm not sure I can argue that the brush is putting much of a dent in helping with these little lines. The hat box lines. There might be a need for some humidity to help with that. But can you hear the difference in this stiffer felt? I really hope the microphone can pick this up. This hat is definitely not as floppy as the Glen. Can you see the iridescence in those feathers? You know, when you think about a gentleman's tie, having a splash of color at the neck, or the pocket square that you would wear on a suit. You think about that opportunity to make a bit of a statement with a splash of color against a conservatively colored suit. I see this area of the hat doing much the same thing, particularly on a black hat like this. This yellow and red and this iridescence popping against the black. I love it. It's a fantastic look, fantastic statement. enough with the black hats. Let's go to our third hat and see how it might be different than our first two. And here we go. This is probably my favorite of the three. This is just, well, I just love this hat. This has the stiffest felt of the three hats. And I think it just sings when you handle it. It has a very stiff snap brim with no binding, as you can see. So it doesn't use binding to help hold the curvature or the snap of the brim. It's just because that felt is so stiff. Really have to work it a bit to get that front brim to snap down like that. Look at that. It's a gray hat this time instead of the black. We've got the wide fabric hat band again, but look at this. You want to talk about a decoration that pops. That pops. Almost like a turquoise, dark feather in the back, the spotted pattern there, and then the thin red, all against the gray. That is a handsome look. We look inside and we see this is the Biltmore Senator. And just like the Mallory, this hat also lives in a box. So it's not as dusty, but it does have the hat box lines. Now, because this felt is so stiff, my guess is that our hat brush will have even less effect at helping the nap on this brim and getting rid of those lines, but we're here to try it out anyway. I don't know if you can see how this line goes well away from the crown. Probably because when I put these hats upside down in the box, I shift them so that they, in the oval hole, they kind of favor this side because I don't want any cardboard rubbing up against the feathers. Which means this line goes well away from the crown. some writers talk about hygiene and changes in personal hygiene habits as another possible contributor to the demise of the hat. Another reason that the hat was so practical was because there was a time when it wasn't always typical to wash one's hair every day. So a hat, keeping dust and dirt and things out of your hair, assisted with the ability to go longer between shampoos. Another interesting connection between two areas that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate a connection otherwise. Heck, when you think about, say, the hairstyles, men's hairstyles of the 50s, I mean, the hairstyles of teenagers and young men. Think about the hair products and the pomades and all the stylish shapes they like to wear their hair in those days. You probably didn't want to cover that up with a hat. You wanted to show your individuality or style. You wanted to do that with your hair rather than with a hat. So it seems to make sense that, if hats were there for practical reasons at one time, and those practical reasons were rendered obsolete, overcome by events, as it were, and the only remaining reason to wear the hat was decorative or stylistic, I suppose it makes sense that it would fade away. In fact, I read one writer that speculated that if something like an article of clothing goes from being functional to decorative, it generally doesn't last more than 2 generations after that transition. This is one stiff brim. So what is the verdict? I think our hat brush does a great job of helping align the nap or realign the nap of the hat and remove dust. I don't think it's quite a match for the lines in the brim that come from being in a hat box for many months. The Biltmore Senator is my favorite looking hat of these three, although the first hat, the Glen, is the more practical hat for me to just wear. If I was going to wear a hat this week in the winter weather, the Glen with a long dark coat would be, I think, the best combination. What do you think? Do you have a favorite of these three? If you're a gentleman, do you own any felt hats? Of course, cowboy and western hats are still a big deal. Do you own a non-western felt hat, or do you know someone who does? Do you know any younger people who have a non-western felt hat? Or is it just us older gentlemen who might have one? And you can argue about what older means on your own, I suppose. You know, I'm a big fan of tinkering videos and videos with a task at hand that uses the hands. So I hope that this task made the translation to an enjoyable video all right. But this is the sound I wanted you to hear. There is no hat review out there that will talk about the sound of a hat, but that's okay. I think this hat, in addition to looking fantastic, just sings. Thanks for looking over my shoulder while I try to tidy up these hats. I appreciate the company. Would love to hear your comments down below about speculations about the demise of the hat and whether you have any favorites. And as always, I look forward to seeing you next time.